Hi, and welcome to another episode of Ask Two Lawyers. Unfortunately, we're down one lawyer today because my law partner and co host of Ask Two Lawyers is traveling today on a very important business meeting. But we did want to come to you because there was a very interesting update to the Tom Girardi trial in the fact that the co defendant, the CFO, Christopher Kamon, we always have said it's Kamon, but apparently it's Kamon. He has filed a plea agreement. So he has entered into a plea agreement with the prosecutors in the California federal case, and he is going to plead guilty in that case. And as part of that plea agreement, he not only has to admit his guilt in terms of what he did with embezzling money and helping Tom Girardi embezzle money, but he also has to state the facts that he's agreeing to. So the things that he's saying that he did do and why he is guilty. This will not have an effect as of right now on the charges in Illinois. If you recall, both Girardi and Kamon are charged in Illinois for the Lion Air crash. That trial is set to begin next year, although prosecutors in that case have said that they might dismiss the charges against Girardi, depending on what the court decides at his sentencing hearing in December. With Kamon pleading out and saying that he's guilty, he's still going to most likely get jail time. He was facing upwards of 40 years in jail. The judge ultimately will decide how much jail time he gets. He's also agreed in the plea agreement to make a payment of a little over $3 million and also to make restitution to the victims. We'll see if that ever happens. But let's pull up the statement. Producer Eric, if you could pull up the statement for me attached to the plea deal, we'll kind of get an idea of what Christopher Kamon is agreeing to and what he is saying he is guilty of. And of course, it's very interesting, and it supports the prosecution's claim against Girardi and Kamon, both of them. I'm going to go back and forth in terms of how I say his name, apparently. So I'll try to say Kamon, but no promises. It might be Kamon through half of this. So the interesting part, I thought, is that, first of all, he starts as CFO for Girardi and Keese in 2004. And he admits that he is responsible for a lot of the financial accounts, including the trust accounts and what we call an IOLTA account. An IOLTA account is an interest on lawyers' trust account. So that's where all the money goes that lawyers receive for settlements. That account bears interest, and at the end of every month, that interest is paid to the State Bar of California, and it goes to provide money for legal services for the indigent and other good causes. But that's how an IOLTA account works. That's where the settlement money was deposited when it came into Girardi and Keese, and ultimately that's where the settlement money was taken out of as it goes out of Girardi and Keese as well. So he admits to having control of all that. So they say that typically Girardi would call up Kamon every morning, and Girardi is the one who is directing these accounts. So that's what Kamon is saying. And he also had signatory authority over all the accounts. Girardi did, but so did Kamon. And generally, each morning, Girardi would call up Kamon and ask for the account balances. How much is in the general operating account? How much is in all the different business accounts? And those are the accounts that the firm would use to pay the bills, including the credit card charges and all the other money that was going out for expenses, presumably of Tom Girardi and his wife and his lifestyle. And if there was not enough money in the operating accounts, if those accounts were low, then what Kamon is saying right here is that Girardi would tell him, we'll transfer money out of the trust account and put it into the general operating account. And if the money had already been transferred for a client matter, Kamon would tell Girardi that, and Girardi down here would say, do it anyways. So it doesn't matter that we've already transferred our share of the fee on a given client matter. I want you to transfer money out of the trust account into the general operating account anyways. So obviously that shows that Tom Girardi was culpable. He knew what he was doing, and he's already been convicted of 4 counts of wire fraud. But we see here that Kamon also knew what was happening, and he knew that, hey, I just want to let you know we already paid our fees on this case. And Girardi says, I don't care, do it anyway. You know, Kamon obviously knew what was going on there. So that was an interesting admission on the part of Christopher Kamon. They also say here that all of the fraud happened as early as 2010 and through December of 2020. And if you recall, that's when the party ended. The money ran out. The firm went bankrupt in December of 2020. But for Kamon to say that it started as early as 2010, that really shows you how far-ranging this fraud was. It's over 10 years of them defrauding clients. It's really quite remarkable that it went on that long. So then in this paragraph here on page 3, he actually recites how the scheme would work. And so he says attorneys at Girardi and Keese. Now that's important because he's not just pointing the finger at Girardi, but he's saying attorneys at Girardi and Keese, including defendant Girardi, would negotiate a settlement on behalf of a client that would require the payment of funds to the client, and those payment of funds would go into the trust account. And we know that there's a few other lawyers who are being investigated for possible criminal action. So keep that in the back of your mind. We'll talk about that at the end. There might be something there. So once the money came in, then of course the money would go out to the general operating account. And even if the attorney's fees had already been paid, Girardi would say, do it anyways. And then right here, they talk about the different things that money would be used to pay. So they would pay other Girardi and Keese clients. So they would take some of the money from one client and they would pass out some money to a former client. Okay, well, that's a classic Ponzi scheme. That's how Ponzi schemes work. You bring in the new money and you pay out the old people. Number 2, they would use it for their payroll and operating expenses. And then number 3, they would pay Girardi and Keese's other expenses, including its American Express credit card bills, which encompass charges for defendant Girardi and Kamon's personal expenses. And we'll see that a little later in this Exhibit 8A as to what Kamon is admitting to. So that's how the scheme worked. No surprise. I think that we saw that during the Tom Girardi trial, but now we have Kamon actually admitting to it. Starting on page 3, they talk about one particular client number 1. And client number 1 was somebody who was badly burned in a public utility accident. We know from the trial that that's the Ruy Gomez client. And this is the case you'll see right here where Tom Girardi, again, to his credit as a phenomenal trial attorney, he was able to secure a settlement of $53 million in that case. Great result for the client, one would think, but we'll see kind of how that went awry. Of that $53 million, Girardi and Keese was supposed to get 25%. So I've got my trusty calculator here. Let's go ahead and do the math together. How much are they supposed to get? So $53 million. Need a little extra light. There's not enough light in the studio, producer Eric. I gotta kind of put it over here by light. So 53 million times 25%. That's 13,250,000. That was the fees to Girardi and Keese. Now that's 13,250,000. I mean, that's a tremendous amount of income going to the law firm. That's more money than most people will see in their lifetime. Turns out it's not enough, but still, that's the amount that they were supposed to be paid, the law firm. And then we see down here that on January 24, 2013, the firm gets a wire transfer of $28 million. Now we can do the math here too, because 53 million was the settlement, but there was a large chunk of money kept in annuity to pay out to the Ruy Gomez clients, which is not abnormal in personal injury settlements. So that's 25 million would have gone into an annuity, and presumably the client would have received payments off of that annuity over the ensuing years. But of this 28 million, that's the cash lump sum amount that came in. Girardi and Keese should have only taken 13,250,000. So if you take 28 million and you minus 13,250,000, that would leave 14,750,000. So almost 15 million would have been left over that should have been passed out to the Ruy Gomez's client as a wire transfer. You call up the client, you say, hey, good news, money came in. Here's your $14,750,000, and I'll wire it over to your account. That never happened. So the 28 million goes into Girardi and Keese. Client doesn't receive a penny. Girardi Keese takes their fee, and then they also take the client's portion of whatever is left over. So let's see how that works out. As we get down here, and this is really the shocking part, is that not until July 1 of 2019, so you're talking 6 years later, does the client receive a check or a wire transfer? I guess it's a check from Girardi Keese for $2.5 million. Keep in mind, they were supposed to get $14,750,000. They got $2.5 million 6 years later. I mean, that is just a slap in the face, I think, to those clients, and just a horrible situation for the victims. And this is just one case. I mean, they're just, they're going through the facts of the worst case, and that's what he's admitting to. But it's just a glaring example of what was going on to many, many people. And they also say down here on the bottom of page 5 that $2.5 million that they paid to client 1, Rui Gomez, came from some other client. And so it's not like they even took it from the proper money where it should have come from. There was some other settlement that came in by the time 2019 rolls around, and they take some other client's money in order to give Rui Gomez the $2.5 million. And you'll notice this is kind of, I thought this was a little amusing, but they actually refer to it as the lulling payment. See right there where it says lulling payment be sent to client number 1, as in to lull them into a false sense of security. It's kind of like, just to keep them quiet, we'll give them $2.5 million. Now, I mean, if you ask me, if I'm entitled to $14.75 million and you give me $2.5 million 6 years later, I don't think I'm going to be very lulled by that. But that's how they termed it, the lulling payment. So I thought that was kind of an interesting use of terms. And then we get down here to the final pages 6 and 7. And that actually talks about Kamon's own embezzlement from Girardi Keese, because, why not? He might as well get in on the party, I guess is what Kamon thought. And Girardi's embezzling from people anyway. And he actually lays out the fact that Kamon would make up false invoices from vendors who supposedly provided goods and services to Girardi Keese. He would pay those invoices. Those invoices were false. And instead, the money would be diverted to Kamon, and he used that money for construction projects at his personal residence, among other things. And we saw during the trial that he spread the money around. He paid a lot of money to a lot of people, including supporting a quote-unquote girlfriend and paying her a monthly stipend and paying for vacations and all of that. So that's really the whole factual pattern that Christopher Kamon has now admitted to being guilty of, and that is the basis of his plea agreement. So we'll see where that goes. The judge is going to have to take up the plea and decide what the sentence is going to be. The interesting thing in my mind about all of this is Kamon clearly knew that Girardi was the one doing it, and he could have testified against Girardi and given pretty strong evidence, obviously. He chose not to do that. And so he did not testify at the Girardi trial. The prosecutors could not have made him testify because of his Fifth Amendment rights. So instead, he kind of stays quiet and he waits to see the result of the Girardi trial, because who knows, maybe Girardi would have been acquitted. And if so, then Kamon probably would have fought the charges himself. But he wasn't. Girardi was found guilty. And so it's, I guess, to some extent, no surprise that Kamon sees the writing on the wall. He knows that he's also going to be found guilty. So he tries to get a better deal for himself than he otherwise would if he went to trial. He also, as part of that Exhibit A that we reviewed, he suggests that these other attorneys, that they knew about this, right? And so there's other people who Christopher Kamon is now going to point to, and that might have been part of the plea deal as well. So it might be that he decided to cash in now because he could give testimony against others that the prosecutors found valuable, and again, try to get a better deal for himself. I thought it was interesting timing in that respect, because, why now? Why not plead guilty before? He waits to see how everything's going to shake out with Girardi, and then he steps forward forward and says, hey, there's other people I can finger, so why don't you give me a good deal? That seems to be what's going on here. So that's really my thoughts in terms of what this all means to the Girardi saga and the other people who are still involved. We still have the sentencing hearing of Girardi in December. This plea deal by Christopher Kamon does not affect his charges in Illinois yet, but we'll see what the prosecutors in Illinois choose to do. I suppose that if Kamon gets a huge trial sentence, those prosecutors might do for Kamon what they're doing for Girardi, which is if it's a big enough sentence, maybe we'll drop the charges. But that makes a little bit more sense for Girardi just because of his age. He's 85 years old. Even a 5 or 10 year prison sentence for Girardi is a life sentence. And that's not necessarily the case with Kamon. And so we'll have to see kind of how that shakes out with all the prosecutors. But that's the latest update on the Girardi saga. Yet another surprise. There's a lot of twists and turns in this case. There have been a lot of twists and turns in this case. And my guess is we're not done yet. There's probably more to come. But we at least wanted to get this out there for you. We will put a link down below in the video to our blog. We'll figure out some way to make a PDF of this plea agreement available to you if you want to take a look at it. It's pretty long. There's 27 pages, but the good part is the Exhibit A at the end, the last 7 or 8 pages. Those are the pages you really want to look at. But we'll make that available to you. As always, be sure to subscribe to our channel, hit the notification button so you can be notified when we put out more videos or go live. And stay tuned. You never know when another update's going to come along with one of the many cases that we're covering here on Ask Two Lawyers.